All right. Hi, Jake. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, guys. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. So, to start off with, we had a lot of interest in one of our clips discussing Malcom Bendall and the Plasmoid Unification model. So, we want to sort of delve into that a little bit more with you. I know you're quite interested in it as well. I know you mentioned you're going to have a pop up making a thunderstorm generator.
Yeah, well, yes, that's right. I do still intend to do that, but I've been a little bit, I want to say let down, but I think one of the things about this type of technology, energy tech, that I have a strong stance on is like, you know, people need to be able to generate their energy locally. We have to break this centralized system down and get this down to the level of the community or the home. And in order to do that, it has to be cost effective, right? And so what Malcolm's done is nothing short of genius, and I would say his model is equally genius. But what I learned about the thunderstorm generator is so far it hasn't really increased fuel efficiency of a generator to the degree where it would be a tenable solution for powering your home, for example. Like I did some calculations on based on like see, it's funny they won't even talk about it. Like they've kept the focus a lot on like this is going to clean up the atmosphere. This has this transmutation effect, which is incredibly interesting. Don't get me wrong, but I remember having kind of a little comment discussion in one of the YouTube videos. I think it was on Martin Fleischman Project YouTube channel, and I said, "Listen, like that's great and all, but we need solutions that are going to be cost effective." And someone was like, "This is about cleaning up the atmosphere." I'm like, if people can't power their homes, if they can't provide energy for their families, I'm like, none of that other stuff matters. Plus, there isn't even a good argument to be made that man-made pollution, let's say, is having any sort of real, what I would call real impact on the globe. There's people like Alex Epstein, who's written a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and he lays out like a fantastic argument for why really we should be using more fossil fuels, not less. And there's not really, there's people don't do true cost benefit analysis anymore because I've talked to people about this. And actually, I credit Alex with this is that, when you're comparing possible solutions or alternatives, a lot of times what happens is the media does this really subtle thing where they say, oh, here's all the positives of this one potential approach, and then here's all the negatives of the other. But we're missing half the equation, right? Like we're not talking about the negatives of the current approach and the positives of the alternative. So they set it up that way intentionally. And so yeah, with Malcolm's tech, I mean, it's so first off, it's 0 point. It's really what's happening in the thunderstorm generator is 0 point technology, but it's not sophisticated yet. It's almost like this is like almost going backwards a little bit in the sense of like um not caveman tech, but it's going backwards because we are almost having to start over where Tesla and some of these others started from. And so that toroidal effect that's happening, the vortex effect that's happening in the thunderstorm generator of opposing hot and cold ionized air, exhaust and ionized air, is creating a 0 point within that, and that creates a what I understand is like a scalar or like a horizontal plane outward. And it's at that point at which these elements have this low power nuclear reaction. It's basically, the transferring of electrons and protons from one thing to another, kind of stepping up or stepping down, which gets you that, that clean exhaust where you're getting mostly, or you're getting like 20% oxygen is what they've been seeing. Um, basically the removal of carbon dioxide and monoxide. So it's 0 point, and that's what's really exciting to me.
And
Yeah.
because it's low powered, is that why it's not as fuel efficient as we think it? Well, as we thought it would be.
No, the low power refers to like comparative to the other ways we know how to do fusion and fission and nuclear reactions. Those are implicitly high powered things in large part because they're explosive. And what Malcolm's tech is actually implosive. So there's, I told you guys already that I'm interested in the esoteric, and I think if anyone were to go look at Malcolm's plasmoid unification model, I actually have a bunch of stuff saved, and I don't think you guys have done too much with screen sharing. But if at some point you want to see some of this stuff, I'd be happy to.
Yeah,
But
whenever you want
You
to.
go ahead and share whenever you feel like it.
let me just pull this up quickly. I won't keep it up for too long, but I think it's helpful to see. So this is Malcolm's plasmoid unification model, and and on the topic of esotericism and whatnot, like this is that. I mean, he's really encompassing both the sort of metaphysical or the dramatic narrative that we are all embedded in, and placing that into a model that also meets up with the physical realm. And so, you'll notice things like the why is this so low? There's a higher quality one, so I apologize that this is a little pixely. But you get this off his site on strikefoundation.org. But you can see like the zodiac signs here. We've got periods of time. Everything is cyclical. Everything is a fractal, and then you've got the elemental table here within this. So he really is, and that is what, in part, why 0 point energy is going to be a fundamental part of this shift that humanity is going to go through, is because it's going to be us recognizing that this material world we live in is tightly tied to some of these more esoteric things. There is a narrative that we're embedded in. So, I think this is fantastic work on his part, and a lot of it is numerology, sacred geometry. So these are topics that I've been quite interested in. So anyways, getting back to 0 point, what his solution, the thunderstorm generator, is doing is basically like a first pass at 0 point. And the cool thing about it is there really is no limit to its application. 0 point isn't like saying internal combustion engine. It's more like, it's more broad than that, and it can be applied in so many different ways. And I think you're going to see that. And to be fair, many people have already built these solutions, and there's almost no shortage of ways in which to utilize it. And something that I think I have some unique insight or perspective on is just how, although not exclusively, I know others have realized this and are realizing this, is just how fundamental the toroid is, the shape of the toroid. Have you guys gotten much into that on your own, or have your guests talked much about that?
Yeah, we've delved into it because it is a like for like, well, symbol wise, it is like for like to a toroid. So yeah, I mean that's what kind of excites me the most about it, that it is sacred geometry. That is the fundamental. That's the fundamentals of what he's created. So, and when you said earlier on about we're basically stripping it back to obviously not caveman times, but whatever progressed us from caveman times, we're stripping it back to that. And I've said this before on the podcast, with science, it seems to be like they go down a route and they build upon on top of each other's work. And it's such a bad sort of system because no one can then discredit anyone else because everyone's works sort of built on top of each other. So there's no way of discrediting anyone. So, and in that case, there's actually no way of wiping the slate clean and then starting again from somewhere else. And I guess that's why Malcolm Bendall gets a bit of hate from one side because it is kind of redefining a lot of what science thinks they know today.
Yes. It absolutely is. Like, if you think of it as science being this branching thing in which old knowledge is built on top of, the problem is like Malcom is bringing you back to the trunk almost, and like science hasn't gone back to that point in a very, very long time. We've already built assumptions into our worldviews and our models that are not questioned anymore, and they're having all sorts of problems with that. If you I One of the things I like to do is I use Chrome on my phone, and it'll give you like a news feed of like things, like topics it thinks you're interested in, and they're all like normie, like mainstream media things, but they do all sorts of funny stuff with like their imagery and their titles as like clickbait. But like, it's just so funny to see how they sort of partially acknowledge that there's problems with our model, the standard model, but yet nobody's really interested in going back and just being like, okay, what if we didn't get it right at the beginning? I think people who are genuinely scientifically minded will always tell you, listen, science is like, it's an ever evolving thing, and um, things models are good as long as they're useful to us, but it doesn't mean they're all encompassing or perfect. And that's the right mindset. But we sometimes have to go back. And, with Malcolm's tech and 0 point in general, the reason that we haven't been able to make some of these breakthroughs in modern times, just to be clear, because I think these things have been solved for in the past, as recently as maybe 300 years ago, but almost certainly pre-Diluvian, 12,000, 11,900 years ago and beyond. It's probably understood then. But, this place is not a place of scarcity. We don't live in a realm of scarcity. We actually live in a realm of abundance. But we've got some of these rules baked in that, science says, the laws of entropy and thermodynamics say yada, yada, yada. It's like, turns out that's not correct. Like, turns out the concept of the ether is valid and was valid. And we've just turned a blind eye to it. And we stopped being curious. We've stopped being curious about what we can do. And the other thing is that people don't build and test and try stuff out anymore. And I love Malcom for that, because it's like, you watch some of his videos, he's kind of like this, down to earth guy who's like, yeah, we're going to rig this up. And like, he's got guys there in a garage doing stuff, but like, that's actual science in my mind. So yeah, we've been delayed. Dr. Stephen Greer has a documentary, his most recent one, called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. And have you guys seen that? I don't know if you watch any of his stuff.
But it sounds great.
Yeah, so he's mostly known for, like, in the world of ufology and whatnot, which I would like to get into at some point. But his focus right now with his most recent documentary is about the lost tech and this industry of confiscation of tech from people who have built solutions that would start to tear down that $1 trillion oil and energy industry. And so there have been many people who have solved some of these issues, have actually built toroidal 0 point energy solutions. Stanley Meyer is the one that comes to mind. He was based out of Washington State here in the States. He got a little bit of, local news publicity in the, I think, 90s for his car that ran on water, but that will sound familiar to you if you watch any of the stuff from Malcom. Also would shout out Jordan at Alchemical Science, because that's actually how I found Malcom. Jordan seems to be just sort of a self-taught kind of guy who's going down these same paths, and he actually got to see the thunderstorm generator in person. But anyways, oh man, I lost my train of thought. Well, anyways, the solutions have been built, but they get confiscated, and that's what I was going to say. It's just like that's what Dr. Greer focuses on in that documentary is like, hey, there are a lot of people who have tried and have been successful in building solutions, and basically they all get confiscated under the name of national security, which is just like the biggest crock and crime against humanity that you could ever imagine. So yeah, I think like Greer's perspective is like we got to get one of these solutions and we got to just like open source it and get it out to like the world in such a way that like it just can't be stopped. And I really hope that that's what Malcolm. I really think that's Malcolm's intention. He doesn't. I don't think he's like trying to become a millionaire. I think he's starting with industry, which is probably good. They've got like one of these massive versions of. Have you seen that? He's got like in the UK there, they've got like some
outside of
massive
London, apparently. Yeah, I've
yeah,
not
it
seen
works.
it, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, one of the gentlemen who was like like an engineer who was like brought in to like evaluate it and test it and stuff. He was basically, I have no idea how it's working, but like I can tell you the results of what's happening, and it's nothing short of amazing. So, but anyways, like the efficiency of the thunderstorm generator will probably get better. It's so interesting when you start to get into the engineering aspect of it, of just how closely tied to this numerology and sacred geometry things are. Like I would still like to build one, but again, I kind of backed off that because I'm like, well, I can't run my home off of it. And so until I can run my home off of it, I'm not going to go spend a bunch of time and money on it. But, like the ratio of the spheres is like 4:3:2. And the length of the generator, the long part, is 144 inches or an octave of 144, right? All of these ratios are important. All of this sacred geometry is important. And because resonance and vibration is a key element of understanding what 0 point is. And really that's, 0 point, you could interchange 0 point and toroidal mechanics or toroidal engineering. In my mind, they're the same thing. So
Yeah. So what exactly, for someone that has no idea about it, what exactly or how exactly does it relate to sacred geometry? Like, what is sacred geometry and how does this have any relation to it at all?
that's a good question. Well, let me start out by this because you guys talked to it was his name Duncan?
Graham Dunlop.
Graham, sorry, Graham. I think he went through like how it works, right, with you guys. Yeah, good. So you guys have that content already. But to me, the relationship is all matter, all reality is toroidal. And what is a toroid? A toroid is you can think of it as like a sphere, right? In your mind, you can imagine what it is, but it has counter rotating hemispheres with poles in which the motion of matter, energy, whatever, moves to the center, to the 0 point, right? And that pattern can be quantified in, I think of it best as talked as ratios. That's what geometry kind of is fundamentally, is geometry is ratios, and so it turns out that matters a lot, and that there's no place within a system in which it doesn't matter. So what I think is probably the case with the thunderstorm generator is it's leveraging that in some ways, but like the internal combustion engine in and of itself doesn't. A lot of the elements of the system don't. And so that's where the room for improvement might lie. But I guess if you're asking more higher level, it's kind of a mystery. I don't know why it is that way necessarily, other than I would say that's how reality is. And so because because reality is that way, there's no part of reality that is not that way. So, again, the other thing about the toroid is it's implosive, right? It's counter-rotating hemispheres that are moving together into a 0 point at which the scalar line comes out, and you get if you looked at it from a side view, you would get like the Celtic cross, like the north-south hemispheres, and then the horizontal plane, you get the Celtic cross with the circle, right? So all sacred geometry, all symbols that have been, around for a very long time. And, fundamentally, I don't know if I know the answer. It just turns out that everything is like that. And actually, let me say this, and this is kind of getting quite esoteric, but it was one of what I believe to be my original thoughts, although, from one perspective, we don't have original thoughts. But when I think about like, what have I heard other people say, I'm not sure that I've heard this perspective on it, which is duality could be seen as a toroid in some sense, because, we live in a dualistic dimension, let's say, worldview, and duality is, equal and opposite, right? For every reaction, there's not equal and opposite reaction. And if you were to try to create some sort of visual representation of duality, I think the toroid is the perfect representation, in part because it meets at the singularity, which is you. You're the consciousness in the middle. But yeah, the to me, the truth is that toroidal shape and the motion that's associated with can basically be associated with just about every level of reality. I think, for example, I think the planet is a toroid. I think all planets are toroids. I think God can be thought of as a toroid because it's Chris Langan, who's one of the people I had mentioned on my topic list, is he was just a quick thing on him. Well, first off, have you guys ever heard of Chris?
Nope.
Okay, no. Cool. I'm glad that, like, one of the things that I love is, like, I want to share people. This is why, like, with these topics, I listed people, because, like, I want people to know about these individuals. And I want them to go listen to them. But Chris Langan is a gentleman who is known for having the highest tested IQ, at least in America. It's something around 200 or north of 190. And he is he has an interesting story in life, because he basically was raised in poverty, and he was really never given any chances within academia. He was just primarily because he's a theist, like he believes in God. And so that kind of, at that time, when he was at that age, he was just kind of, doors were not open to him. But so he's kind of this big burly dude. He's probably in his late 60s or early 70s now, good shape. But he was a bouncer in New York City, but he's brilliant. And he was interviewed by Kurt Jamungal, who runs a channel on YouTube called Theories of Everything, which I would encourage, you guys or anyone listening to check it out. Kurt is a very humble guy. He's a great podcaster. And he interviewed Chris, and Chris talked about, his cognitive theoretical model of the universe, the CTMU, which is his unique work. And his claim to fame really ought to be that, not his IQ. But what it is he was actually the first one to really suggest like what would be called like a simulation theory. He actually was the first, but he'll never get that credit because he's not in those circles. But he's someone who's really worth looking at with this stuff. And when he talks about God, it's almost like, you start with the circle, and everything that is reality is within that circle. God is the background. There's nothing behind the background. That's what God is. And so the toroid is kind of like that, where it's like all the action happens on the inside, sort of. So anyways, like, I really see that as like, that's what God, you could just substitute God with reality or vice versa, but there is nothing outside of reality. There's just tiers to it. There's just, we're sort of down on a low level. We're on like a lower density, as they say. And there's all sorts of strata to it. But I think ultimately, you get something that I don't know that you can like look at God, but like if you could, I think it looks sort of like a toroid.
You know how you just explained that, which was a great explanation, and it got me thinking. Do you know when you literally just mentioned the tiered system, and we're sort of quite low in the tiers, so to speak. Do you think it's possible to, as a human, to move up a tier?
Well, I would say I would be quick to say yes, except for you put the as a human part in there. But the answer might be yes, as a human, we might be able to. And in fact, actually, I take that back. I would say yes, as a human, we can. And I think we will. I think 2024, guys, is going to be a really important year. And I know everyone kind of has, honestly, I think if you talk to real people, which you guys are doing all the time, they have this instinct that's
I'm hearing it a
them.
lot for 2024.
Yeah. Well, I was on the phone to Cam earlier today, and he got off the phone to somebody who said 2024 is going to be a big year.
It is. Now, it might be a really bad year too, but it depends on which direction you're going. Now, like one of the things that I really wish more people would realize is like, I think spiritual people, I'm a Christian. I was born and raised in northern Wisconsin. And I think the people that I grew up around do fundamentally understand this, but ultimately, like we get to choose. And that's, I think, what's discarded by so many people is like, they don't think they do. But like you do get to choose which direction in the toroid that you're moving. Are you moving towards source? Or are you moving away? Source is like another one of those terms that gets used for God, right? Like, are you moving towards it or are you moving away from it? Are you seeking separation? Or are you seeking a reuniting with your higher self and all of those levels above your higher self? And so, I think, in some sense, it's always happening, but our planet and our solar system is moving into the galactic plane, right? So getting on the scale of the galaxy again, what is it? It's the eternal spiral. It is a toroid. It's fundamentally a toroid. And we are actually moving into and through the galactic plane. And there's a lot of might say like energetic effects that are going to happen as a result of that. And so I think, 2024 as a number, if you just want to go into Malcom's model, this is going to be a very important year. And I think that if you're on the right path, well, they're just paths. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I would just say like, if you're on that positive path, that agenda of service to others path, you could experience some quite shocking transformations very soon because of where we are physically in this reality, in this dimension. But going back to your question, as humans, we may move as we go through this process. We may move into what's often referred to as fourth density or 4D or even into 5D. And that, I think it's probably pretty likely that we have a physical incarnation still, a physical body, albeit possibly evolved. I don't know if you guys have heard some of the sort of more, well, I won't say speculative because I do believe it, know it to be true, but, like the possibility of, say, for example, the sun impacting our genetics, our DNA. Have you guys gotten into anyone that's talked about like that, for example?
Not that specifically, no. But it sounds
Aaron,
interesting.
Have you heard anything about that before?
Not with the sun, no.
So some people speculate, I guess you might say, that as we move through this galactic plane, the sun and actually all the planets are evolving and transcending, and that what you probably have heard about is this like sort of growing mention in the mainstream even of things like CMEs and solar flares, and like, of course they're always casting it with like a light of doom of like, hey, it's going to knock out all our electricity.
Yeah, and a way to change the color of the maps and stuff like that.
Right. But it might be that transformation that the sun is going through, and its output of energy and its raising of its consciousness, because I think the planets are also conscious to some level, may impact us genetically. I mean, most of, you've heard the term junk DNA. Excuse me.
Junk.
You heard that before? The term like junk DNA?
Yeah, parts of our DNA that aren't being used at the moment.
Correct. Yeah. And so they'll just tell you like, oh, it's junk DNA. Right? It's like, if any of us had any curiosity at all when we heard that the first time, we'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. like the thing that controls our programming, everything about what we are physically, that like most of it's not even like half, it's like most of it is like this turned off junk DNA. Well, what if we are capable of being a lot more? Like what if we have abilities that haven't been turned on yet? And I do believe that as we progress on our ascension path, as we grow spiritually and collectively, I think some of these things, these switches will be turned on. And while that may include physical changes, I think it's most likely initially to be something that affects our cognitive abilities. And I do think that humans are fundamentally, what would you say, telepathic beings. And I think that will be something that, some of us might begin to unlock as we go through this process. And, that's one example of like, how we as humans can go through that ascension from a 3-dimensional reality to potentially a 4th-dimensional or a 5th-dimensional perspective or reality, while still in a body. But it'll be an evolution, I think. It'll be an evolution.
Do you think things like the pandemic and numerous other things that have happened in a sense to push humanity in the direction of being able to wake up to it and start embracing the fact that you can change? Because I know a lot of people since the pandemic have woke up to, and a lot of it's woke up in a sense of like F the governments type thing. But I guess like there's that other side of it where you go so far into like wanting to not listen to the government that you unlock a whole nother level of thought. And it feels like a big wave of that came after the pandemic. And it can't help but imagine that it's to help us sort of a large number of people to sort of wake up and smell the coffee, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think, it's pretty clear to most people that what we went through, like that's a part of a negative agenda, right? Like that was part of an agenda that is, there are some, so I'm a religious man, I mentioned it. Like there's a verse in the Bible about we struggle not against flesh and blood, but against the powers and principalities. And there are some, I'll call them beings that are playing the long game. Okay, they're implementing an agenda that exceeds our lifetime, which means we're very blind to it because people don't think that way, right? We have short lifespans, relatively speaking, and when we're locked into like survival mode, I was just talking to my wife about this the other day. It's like when we're locked into survival mode, who has the time, right? Like I'm fortunate enough to have some time and a high degree of curiosity, I would say. But like, that what happened with the pandemic was part of the agenda. And so, that service to self agenda has plans. And, when you say like, did that help us, sort of snap out of it and wake up? It did, but that's not because that's what they want. It's because part of the nature of reality is equal and opposite reactions, right? And so I love this scene. Have you guys watched it was probably made around like, I'm gonna guess like 2016 or something. I'm hoping as guys from the UK that you've seen this, but the more recent King Arthur film.
No, I've not seen that.
No,
Let me see.
my partner wants me to watch it, and I've not watched it.
I'm gonna try to. I can't remember who starred in it.
Is it not Charlie Hunnam?
It is, yeah, 2017, I think. Sorry, this is taking me a second. Yeah, Legend of the Sword, directed by Guy Ritchie, and yeah, Charlie Hunnam. Yes, correct. Plays Arthur, and it's been out for a while, so I don't even care about spoiling. Right, like we're just gonna go to one of the last scenes where he vanquishes the prime enemy. He tells him, he's like, do you want to know? You asked me what gave me such strength. And he's like, it was you. And it turns out because the reason Arthur, it was kind of like the Moses story, right? Where he like fled as a child. He's floated down a river. He's picked up at a brothel. That's like basically the Moses story. And without knowing who he is, he becomes who he's meant to be. And he tells the enemy at the end, like, you're the reason I'm here. The reason I'm so powerful is because of you. And for that, I bless you. You make sense of the devil. And that's why people are waking up, because they're pushing us. They're pushing a very negative agenda. It's very evil. It's very, very evil. But they either don't realize or don't care. They're just trying to scoop up as many people as they can in their fear. But many of us are waking up, and this is just the beginning of the journey for many of the normies, right? Is this year. Now I just pray that it happens quickly for them, because I don't know what the future holds exactly. I don't know if there's going to be a point in time at which it becomes very difficult to make that leap, that ascension, if you're not there already. But it is absolutely an awakening that I pray is more broad than what we are led to believe, So, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, on what you're saying as well, with like the fact that they're playing a long game. So us as humans, realistically, we don't look too far in the future. You'd be lucky if you plan 70 years ahead. That's going way beyond. You're probably planning 30, 40 years ahead, in terms of like your really long-term planning. So there's a theory that like these guys that are playing the long game, they're passing it down generation to generation. And because these generations, they're losing a lot of the potency on what it is that they're building, because it's being handed to them, and they're like, oh my God, look at all this power. Like, look at the royal family of England, for example. Like, they're just getting the power, and they're like, oh, look at the power I'm in. Look at the situation here. I can abuse the power because there's not much I really need to do. So all I can do is abuse it. So the same thing's happening with all the elites, where they're getting gifted the power. And these guys are getting a bit reckless with it and thinking, well, I don't want to wait 100 years for my grandchildren to inherit this. Like, I want this now. And they're sort of speeding up the process to a point where they think everything's set up in a way where they can take it. But the amount of people that I've already seen rebelling against it shows that it might not quite be ready. So they are, I guess there's a sense of positivity there that they've rushed it, and there's too many people are going to wake up.
They've overplayed their
rebel
hand
completely.
Yeah. As far as those bloodlines, I would say is what they are, the bloodlines, and you start to get into like the secret societies, which really are their brotherhoods, right? Yeah, I think a lot of those people, my guess is that still most of them, maybe almost all of them, are under the impression that what they're doing is to make things better. They're just totally delusional, and that's because they've been lied to, and they've they've had the wool pulled over their eyes. Maybe. I think there are those who, do know exactly what they're doing, and they just don't care, that they're in service to themselves. And I would also say that while I do believe there are some, I won't call them higher dimensional beings, but beings that are significantly more advanced than us, might call them transdimensional, might call them demonic, whatever it is, yes, one, they have long lasting lifetimes. They're playing a long game, and they're feeding down these lies into humanity, into some of these royal bloodlines and these brotherhoods, and they're tricking them. But I think some people probably know exactly what's going on, and I would even speculate that some of these conscious, these souls, are the same, generation after generation. Like, I'm not convinced that the elite don't have access to cloning tech. I mean, do you guys? I apologize for a little bit of a personal question, but how old are each of you?
I'm 29.
Yeah. So like, I'm not sure, you guys would have been real young, but if you remember like the first sheep that was
Oh
cloned.
yeah, was it Dotty? Dotty the sheep.
I wouldn't
I think,
remember.
yeah, I think it was in the UK, wasn't it?
Yes, I do
Yeah, I
believe
remember
it was.
learning about it in primary school, but
I mean,
elementary
that
school.
had to have been in the 90s. So like, again, these people are also the same people who are a part of the the interior government. The cabal is another word that gets used, and I'm not convinced they don't have access to some of this tech, and I'm not convinced that they don't know how to move their consciousness from one generation to the next so that they can execute this plan. So, little bit of a creepy thought, but I mean,
but it seems more and more true as days go by that it is more and more likely.
So if these entities are pulling the strings and manipulating what we consider like the people who control the world or lead the world, how long has this been going on for? Do you know the history of it? Has it happened to the human population before? Has there been a reset?
yeah, I thanks for asking that, Aaron, because one of the things that has been one of my greatest passions, I guess you would say, in, let's say, for like the last 2 years, been on this journey, and I had kind of an experience that really kind of accelerated it. But I've been really interested in history, and potentially the idea that what we've been taught is not even remotely close to what actually happened. And I don't know to what degree any of you guys have gotten into this, but like, I guess like a high level topic would be like Tartaria. If you had anyone that's talked to you about Tartaria.
We've not had anybody on, no, but I know a little bit about it from.
People have touched on it, right? That have come up.
Yeah. So, again, I want people to know people who have done such great work, right? John Levi has a channel on YouTube, who has done this topic, has delved into this topic. He's a very humble man, little monotone, which is actually kind of funny, though. He is kind of a funny guy. And he's really investigated this quite deeply. There's a YouTube channel called I Am Kairos. He's sort of this middle-aged man out in California. He's born and raised in Napa Valley, and California is a very ancient place. It's full of ancient ruins, totally not acknowledged by the mainstream. And then My Lunch Break is another YouTube channel who is seems to be a little bit younger guy, but he's created some great content. But the idea is that, well, I'll try to give this somewhat briefly, is that humanity has gone through many resets. And we're getting that term, right? Like this great reset term and this Agenda 2030 thing. But like, to answer your question, Aaron, that seems to be what these entities do. It's what they do. And I think they've become very proficient at it. Now, one of the things that makes them so effective is that they seem to be able to imbue on humanity a collective amnesia in which we, have you ever heard about like when people have severe trauma and like not almost like one of the ways they cope with it is through like this amnesia effect where like they almost like can't recall it.
Suppress the
And then,
memories, like the bad memory. Yeah.
and then they have to be like regressed to, regression therapy or, hypnotherapy or something to like really get to the bottom of it and deal with it. Well, like these entities seem to be successful at not only destroying and wiping out entire civilizations, but also then creating a collective amnesia on humanity in which we're not able to remember what happened. And so from my study, I believe that probably the last cataclysm and reset that seem to go together was probably as recent as the 1800s, maybe the late 1700s or 1800s, which is way more recent than most people were ever thinking about, right? And that's where you start to get into these topics around like Tartaria, mud flood, and a lot of this. So one of the only reasons that people like John and Lunch Break and Kairos have been able to get to make some headway in this is because the enemy is very good and they're playing a long game and they've got a lot of tech, but they're not perfect. Okay. And evil is fundamentally incoherent. And so they mess up. They do make mistakes. And one of the things that is left is the architecture. And so many of these videos on this topic are going to focus around architecture. And it is fascinating to me beyond belief because I have a book here. I've stood it up so that maybe some people will notice it, but it's John Levi's book and it's called Evidence of the Old World. And the old world is basically, think about like Lord of the Rings. Like J.R.R. Tolkien was totally keyed into something. There was a civilization here before us that built some structures that there's just, to me, I'm at the point now where I even have a hard time giving people like sort of a benefit of the doubt or being like, I get that you don't get it. It's more like these cathedrals, these, Gothic and, some of these just absolutely gorgeous buildings, right? All ornate beyond belief, all extremely symmetrical. All of them have the rose windows, the lotus symbol in them, right? Like a lot of them are churches. Yeah, they weren't. I'm a Christian. I'll tell you right now, the Christians didn't build these. Okay. Some other civilization built these, and they're everywhere. They're actually everywhere. They often get categorized as like Greco-Roman, right? And like they get associated with like colonialism, but like that whole period of time, like colonialism is just like, it's like a whitewashing and it's really vague and it doesn't make any sense when you start to get into it. Like, okay, so these colonialist settlers from, the UK or the Dutch or whomever, they travel all the way to India and then or Africa, and then they build these Greco-Roman, just unbelievable buildings. Like that's like the first thing they do. Or like if you go to like American history, which for me was probably what made this really difficult at first, is because I'm like, well, we know America's history, right? Like, the Pilgrims came over and there was just a bunch of Indians and teepees out there. It's like, no, actually, no. These buildings, the capitals, all these domed structures, the insane asylums, the churches, the cathedrals, they were all here. And part of the reason we know they were here and that they went through a cataclysm is because most of their first levels are halfway submerged, which is where you get the mud flood. You would absolutely never build a structure that way. Never, ever, ever would you lay a foundation below grade and at like angles, right? Like if you look at like photos of San Francisco, like you'll get buildings that are like, because San Francisco is known for being like really hilly. I've been there once and it's like, yeah, the hills are pretty steep. And you get these buildings that it's like, they're perfectly level, but the ground, like cuts down at an angle where it's like, no, nobody built them that way. They were covered up. They were flooded, possibly in some sense. And so the buildings are almost all that remain of a history that's been forgotten and a people that's been forgotten. And I don't know who those people are or were exactly, but I can tell you one thing, they're not here anymore. And so part of my belief is that if we were to go back to this idea of what's coming, this ascension, is that I think probably what happens, again, this is also informed by like my Christian view on like what like the second coming looks like, is like a divergence of consciousness on this planet, including the planet itself. And so imagine, for example, that over time, it may not be instantaneous, although it may happen quickly. Maybe some of us just become invisible to others, right? And like maybe we leave some things behind, but maybe we ourselves, like maybe that civilization is still on Earth. Like maybe they're here, but maybe they're in fourth density or fifth density, that at a higher plane, but like their buildings are left. But they just, these buildings just could not have been built. I mean, if you look at like, I just take North American history, you've got horse and buggy, Oregon Trail, right? Like level people, no power tools. And you've got, the first things that are getting built are the largest, like these insane asylums, for example. I remember one of them in Ohio, like up until the point the Pentagon was built, it was the largest building in North America. And it was built in like the mid 18 or late 1800s. It's like, no, that isn't what they were doing at that time. They weren't just, they weren't hauling, 20-ton cuts of granite from who God knows where on horses and buggies. Like it, people question the pyramids and seem to generally, I find more and more people are willing to admit like, yeah, it doesn't really, like they probably couldn't have done that unless they were like advanced, what's his name? Graham Hancock and, a lot of those guys now, like they kind of having that realization, but like the same holds true for a lot of these buildings that we were told were built in the late 1800s. And they almost, by the way, almost every one of them has the exact same story in terms of how they were built. It's same with the World's Fairs buildings. They were all commissioned as a part of a design contest. That's how they get the architects. They were all contest winners. Apparently, everyone in the 1800s were master architects. No problem for them. So they had hundreds purportedly of people, and they chose the winners, and then they built these structures that will last long after we're gone, and they built them in like 2 years or sometimes 1 year. We couldn't build them today in 1 year. And so it's clear that like whoever built them, maybe they did build them in the 1500s, right? But we don't know who they are or were fundamentally. So, this is a very deep rabbit hole, and it's like it's one of those topics where, like, my father's an intelligent guy. Like to talk with him about a lot of this stuff, and it's like he can't get there. Like he can't make the leap. It's like, when you tell him, it's like, doesn't it seem like a little weird that like the Great Chicago Fire, which basically burnt down the entire city of Chicago, which supposedly started by some cow tipping over a lantern, and that started a fire. It's like, okay, somehow that burned down the entire city of Chicago, which was full of these amazing structures, some of them which are still here. There were World's Fair buildings. They're still there. Isn't that a little weird that happened on the same exact day as the Great Peshtigo Fire, which Peshtigo is in Wisconsin, and burned, it was like the largest fire ever recorded. It was the same exact day as the Great Chicago Fire. It's like, doesn't that strike you as a little odd? And it's like, he's like, he can't get there. But it's like, it's just not realistic. And so all of these buildings basically go through this story of commissioned through a contest, built in a couple years, typically in the mid to late 1800s. Often we're told they're not the first structure on the site, on the premises. which is basically another way of saying they've always been there. But they're like, oh, there was a church here and it wasn't good enough. And so we tore it down. We built another one. Right. So making up a story of like, oh, we just built these. When it's like, no, they've just been there forever. And then typically they burn down in the 1920s to 1940s. Almost unanimously, they're burned to the ground, which doesn't even make sense either because stone buildings don't burn. Like they do not burn to the ground. So they're being destroyed. Our history is being destroyed. One of the among many of the travesties of the world wars and World War II in particular, the bombing of Dresden destroyed countless old world architecture. If you ever look at old photos of Dresden, it is unbelievable. And then you start to realize who's orchestrating the wars. It's not conflicts among people. They're orchestrated by powers and principalities playing a long game. And they're using us against each other, dividing and conquering, and erasing our past constantly. And it's very sad, actually, because like when I see some of these videos of these structures, it's like they're so beautiful. Like they're just unbelievably beautiful. And I planned my wife is originally from Portugal and we plan to go there this summer. And I can't wait to go see some of that because obviously one of the things that her and I kind of go back and forth, and she's like, well, okay, but North America is one thing, but like we know Europe's history. It's like, do we? Like, no, those buildings were also getting built at the same time by a civilization that we've been lied to about.
Yeah, because I think the Houses of Parliament were built in 1800s.
Which building? Sorry?
The Houses of Parliament in London.
Right.
They'll be in the 1800s. I just Googled it and they got the stone from a quarry in York, which today would take 4 hours in the car to get there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Or 5 hours in the car.
Watch my lunch breaks videos on this. Anyone who's watching that's interested, because he kind of has been, one of the cool things he does is he'll leverage like AI, like ChatGPT, like, hey, what would be like the logistics of building one of these buildings? Like how many people would it take? Because one of the other things that's crazy about these stories around these buildings is like to tell you who built it, it'll be like Procter and Sons. It's always like something and Sons, it'll be like, and then like the architect dies and then the son takes over. It's hilarious. I actually, ironically, in lunch break talks about this. It's almost like the stories are AI generated, which kind of gets to telling you a little bit more about who it is that's manipulating us. They're a technologically advanced society who could be thought of as mechanistic in their thinking. AI is mechanistic in its thinking. It actually can't create anything new. It has to be seeded information. But anyways, I digress. But yeah, they the buildings just they're truly like unimaginably beautiful and impossible to have been built when they were built. Like you said, I mean, we're talking a 4-hour trip in today's mechanisms with cars, and they're doing this stuff with apparently horse and buggy and no power tools. So
when you talk about simulation theory and you say these entities are mechanistic in their thinking, it makes you think that perhaps they're a program that's been put into the simulation, like just an AI program that's been put into simulation to manipulate the simulation to do as it wants it to do.
Yeah, they seem to be using Earth. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe I could kind of talk a little bit about like some stuff related to like non-human, and get into ufology a little bit. But they seem to be sort of or had been surrounding Earth in a veil, of some sort. It's like they've kind of created this encapsulated system here in which it's very difficult for us to see out beyond it. And I think they're using technology to do it. In fact, I think the moon is probably one of those pieces of tech. Even if you don't want to go into the ET realm and sources of information from other dimensions, you can hear people start to talk about, like, you'll hear the story, for example, of how the astronauts, when the lunar module went back down to this moon as they were leaving, the moon rang like a bell for like 2 hours. Well, okay, that thing's hollow. Okay. That means that thing's hollow. It's resonating, And so the moon there was probably a time, maybe this antediluvian, meaning like Atlantis time, which, just for anyone who doesn't know, that's the great flood of Noah, 11,900 years ago. This all lines up very nicely with biblical history as well as other sources of history. Great flood covered the earth about 12,000 years ago. The civilization that was here before them, one of the civilizations was Atlantis, and it may have stretched back as far as like 100,000 years. Like, that may have been a very, very old civilization. But at that time, there may have been no moon. And based on some of so like I said, I'm extremely curious, and I take information from everywhere. And it seems to me that there are more beings of, let's say, of a more positive nature, more benevolent nature, who, although they won't come here because it does go against the logical concept of the prime directive, right, of non-interference, they are communicating with some people. And they seem to be telling us that the moon was brought in after what was known as the Tiamat Wars. You guys are familiar with the term Tiamat? It's the goddess of water in the Mesopotamian creation story. And apparently, Tiamat was a planet in our solar system, and it was destroyed in a brutal conflict of these evil beings, let's say, that are kind of have had some control here. They blew the planet up, and it was a water planet. And so this water, traveled out through the rest of the solar system. Is also why we have the asteroid belt. That's the remnants of a planet. But the water apparently made its way to Earth, and then it flooded the Earth. But at that time, the more benevolent beings, I guess, I don't know. I don't even know if it was the benevolent beings, but apparently the moon was brought in as a satellite to help stabilize Earth. So Earth is on it, tilted on its axis, right? And we know that the moon is a stabilizing force on our planet, right? It controls the tides. It has a gravitational counterreaction to that tilt. And so it was put here seemingly for our benefit, or for the planet's benefit, for stability after that conflict, which happened to cause the flood. So like something was happening elsewhere. It affected Earth, and they had to come in quick and like make a fix. And that was apparently the moon. But it seems to be more of like a base, let's say. It's very, very strange, for example, that it's. No, I think you're good. Can you guys hear me again?
Yeah, it's back to normal now.
Back to normal.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm on Starlink, so it does get occasionally skippy. But
Is it good in general?
Is it what?
Is it quite good in general?
I'd say it's by far the best satellite option. It's because it's low Earth orbit, it's low latency, and now that I've got like the actual standard residential package, yeah, I get pretty solid speeds. I'm impressed. I mean, fiber is supposed to be coming to my area. I'll be definitely getting that, but it's been pretty solid for me.
How much do you pay for Starlink, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't. It's public. It's $120 here in the States. So little on the pricey side. I was paying $150 because, ironically, I had to initially get the RV, or the mobile subscription, because my area wasn't covered, which I live in like a rural area in Florida, and Starlink was like built to serve rural areas. And then they brought, so entire South Florida had like no Starlink service up until, more recently. And then there was like a big chunk, like a moment where like almost all of the area was supported, except for where I live. I was like one of like 4 little grid areas in all of South Florida that didn't have service. But I'm in a rural area that has no other high speed options. So it's like, I don't know what's going on there. Finally, I was able to get like the standard version, which brought my price down. But yeah, it's pretty solid. It's pretty good. Yeah. So yeah, anyways, going back to kind of the moon, the moon seems to be kind of like a base, I guess you'd say. And there seems to be I've seen enough. So, with this stuff, for anyone who's, I just have to pause for a second, because anyone who's like, okay, well, this is just like, where are you getting this information from? It's like, listen, if you're interested, go do your own research. But the way that any of us come to know things is by looking at as many sources of information as we can. And we do this thing where we're constantly putting a puzzle together, and when things don't fit, you toss them out, or you say, hey, like, I'll take this, but I'll remember that there's a part of this that doesn't fit. And one of the things that's so crazy about like, for all intents and purposes, we're having like a conspiracy theory conversation, right? But one of the funny things about the fact that like all of these conspiracy theories are true is that they fit together. They're coherent. They actually they conflict less with each other than our own models of reality and our own history.
Yeah, the so-called truth.
And so when you see that, what are you supposed to do other than think like, my intuition tells me that these things are true. And so just laying that context out, because I'll just quickly mention some sources, and anyone who's interested in going to listen or look at some of these can do so. So I follow a YouTube channel called Swaru Official. This is apparently a young woman who is extraterrestrial. They are in a ship, in a crew that is orbiting Earth, and they are of the they are call themselves, or they are from a planet called Taygeta. So they're Taygetans, and they are of the Pleiades star cluster. So you guys heard at all about the Pleiades in any of your conversations?
Yeah, it's been brought up, and I think I've read it. It's come up, crops up in books quite a bit.
Seems to be one of the places that, like, so humans apparently are not from Earth. Like, our genetics seem to indicate that we are a bit of a mishmash of races, and
almost like we're manufactured.
Right. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, like, without getting too much into like, ethno and kind of genetic race things, but it's like, we're clearly a planet of very different people, right? Like, I have blue eyes and lighter hair, and my wife has brown hair and dark eyes. And, like, we have very different cultures, and, like, we're a bit of a mishmash here. And it turns out that's because we're from many different places. And the Pleiades seems to be one of the places that the earliest humans went to, from my understanding, based on, like, again, Swaru, who's this young girl. Very interesting thing about her is she is a consciousness that is manifested in multiple bodies at the same time. So she has a mom that is her, and she has a daughter that is her. Okay, so this is, I would like to talk about consciousness. I'm laying this out to you because she's a part of this crew that's here, and that basically the moon is this place where the Galactic Federation, which has been talked about a little bit in mainstream, you get this guy Haim Eshed, who ran the he founded this Israeli space program, saying that the Galactic Federation exists.
I've heard of this. Yeah.
Yep, that humans are the interior government. Humans have been interacting with it for some time, and they're here. And so the moon is part of this matrix. structure that's suppressing our reality right now. And so on one hand, we can't get rid of the moon probably, but on the other hand, we sort of need that to get shut down because we need to be able to see what's going on out in the world beyond us. So Swaru official is one of those. A couple of other crew members have also taken the step of creating videos. I just challenge anyone to go watch it and just listen. And you know, when I hear things that I don't agree with, I pick it apart. And there's very little that I've heard from her that doesn't resonate with me. So I think a lot of your audience it may resonate with as well. Stephen Greer, great source of information on this, has been informing, help bringing people up to speed within the U.S. government, is really passionate about helping humanity go through this transformation, get the tech out so that we can power our homes, but also, obviously he created this protocol called CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is sort of a guided meditation to help humanity make peaceful contact with non-humans. Another two gentlemen who can be found on the Gaia network. It's one of the things that actually my wife and I subscribe to. We don't subscribe to Netflix or anything, but we subscribe to Gaia. And this gentleman named Emery Smith has a program called Cosmic Disclosure, in which he interviews different people who have had experience and been a part of, let's say, either programs with what's called like the secret space program or the internal government. Emery is really, really good. Actually, I think he lives here in Florida, which is kind of cool. And he talks to this gentleman who goes by Tim Tactical. He's from Germany. He's part of like the covert governance in Germany, who is sort of like helping broker sort of a peaceful transition. He seems to have had a lot of experience with the Greys, for example. The Gray, I think there's a few different shades, no pun, but of Greys, but he's had direct experience with them. Actually, in fact, he claims that he's going to be getting a show on Gaia in which they're going to have a conversation with a Grey. So that hasn't happened yet, but like that would be, they're telepathic beings, but they can communicate through symbols and they can translate into German apparently very effectively, which is interesting because there's this whole other sort of side topic of like the Germans in late World War II and like Antarctica and like, maybe the Greys were involved with them or whatever. But so those are two other people that I would mention. And there was one other that I was going to mention that now it escapes me, but it'll come back to me. But yeah, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, and it's really hard to parse it all, but you just have to use your discernment, I guess, Yeah, so like what kind of, I've talked a lot now. I'd love to know, you guys are curious guys.
So we started the podcast in 2021, November 2021. We had the idea to set up a YouTube channel. And we hadn't really delved into sort of any of the esoteric or occult or spiritual. My mind there was like, I saw a load of nonsense. But we set up the YouTube channel because we noticed the mainstream media was lying to us, essentially. So we felt we were being lied to. We set up the YouTube channel and we wanted to just find out the truth and open our minds and just figure out what is going on in the world and what does the world mean. And on that journey in, I think it's June this year, was it June or earlier, Cam? When we went down this sort of more spiritual path and opened our mind to a bit more of what is going on out there. So a lot of it
Earlier.
It was with Brandon.
Yeah, that was probably Jan or Feb, maybe. Probably been about a year.
Yeah, so a lot of it was more of the political stuff beforehand, where we could see we were being lied to about the pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, what's going on in mainstream media, like all the wokeism that's being shoved down our throats. And we focused heavily on that, and then we sort of delved down this path now, which has there is a you think you know something, and then you find out you don't know anything at all, and then you open up to a whole other world of theories and possibilities, and that's what I think. That's what the beautiful thing is about it is anything. It's like it makes sense and it leaves it sort of open, if you know what I mean. It's like it's not like a closed book. It's like it could be argued that it's this, or it could be argued that it's that. But it's not like it's definitely that, and that's all you're gonna learn and know. It's not that.
Right. Hey, bravo to you guys, because that's what seeking truth is. And I've said I know it's a little facetious of me to do so, but like I'll occasionally mention when I think that what I'm about to say is an original idea of mine, because one of the things I've seen Chris Langan struggle with is he never gets any credit. Like people always like co-opt his thoughts and like, his simulation theory. Like we hear like Elon talk about it, but like Elon will never credit Chris. So like one of the things that I think is an original thought of mine is, it doesn't really matter where you start seeking truth or where you start digging for it. In your guys' case, your entry point was, let's say like COVID and kind of with what happened there. For others, it might be, an election being stolen, or maybe for others, it would be, something else. Like it doesn't really matter. But your challenge, everyone's challenge, is to see how deep you can go. And ironically, what happens is the further you dig, the more you find connection, right? The more you find interconnectedness with other topics and other things. And so it seems only natural that you guys would get guests and you yourselves would start to go into the more esoteric topics, because as you stay open-minded and as you talk to people who give you information that seems solid, you will just naturally go in that direction. And I think as long as we do that, as we as humans do that, there's no limit to what we can know, let's say. There's a term. Yeah.
Before the podcast and before we went down this esoteric path, I'd say I was a hard atheist. Like, if someone asked me about God, I'd be like, God doesn't exist. Like, it's just a load of made up like crap, and religion, it just causes war and issues in the world. And that was my view, and I stuck to that view so strongly. And now when I look back, I think, why did I stick to it so strongly when I didn't really know anything about it? And then once I learned about religion, and I learned about this esoteric path, and I learned about higher beings and spirituality, I think actually religion does play a vital role in life itself. Like the morals and everything that we've learned as humans all stems from the teachings of religions. Religions have all these stories which have been passed down generations to teach us how to live a wholesome life. Whereas before, I was just writing religion off and saying it's a load of crap, where it's not a load of crap because there's a lot of good knowledge in there.
Pam, what's kind of been your path? Is it similar or?
Yeah, well, we're brothers, by the way. Did you know?
Oh, geez. I mean, like on one hand, it seems super obvious, but on the other, I didn't know. So, hey, that's cool.
Yeah. So, I guess my path is similar to Aaron's in a crazy way that we're both originally from like just outside of Manchester in England, which is northern England. And then Aaron moved down to London just before the pandemic started. But we used to chat on the phone quite a lot. And then definitely when the pandemic was going on, we would be on the phone just catching up and talking about what's going on. And we both sort of fell into the route of this is something fishy going on at the same time. But even prior to all of that, like I would put myself back to when I was probably about 14, 15, maybe when YouTube just came out and it was very easy to fall down these crazy rabbit holes. And I was super addicted. At that age, I was just addicted to going down all these crazy rabbit holes of
Yeah,
these
you just
crazy
gobble it
conspiracy.
all up, like a
Yeah.
sponge.
And I guess at that age as well, you're looking at these conspiracy theories and in it's sort of like a fantasy for you because you're looking at them like, oh my God, imagine if this was true. Imagine if that was true. And then suddenly something clicks in your head and you're like, holy shit, a lot of that is true.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you've heard the term or the saying, reality is stranger than fiction. Where do you
Exactly.
think fiction comes from?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? And you mentioned it before when you talked about Lord of the Rings and that fantasy side of the world. These ideas that you can't pluck them out of thin air. It's
Correct.
actually impossible to pluck something out of thin air because
Correct.
it
All
actually doesn't
information
exist.
comes, yeah, all information comes from somewhere. You're accessing it somehow. It's often referred to as like the Akashic record. It's like some dimension in which all information can be readily accessed of all time. But so I have another sort of theory that, again, I think is quite unique. And to me, I see the Jaws and the Pulp Fiction posters behind you there, Cam, and I mentioned Lord of the Rings. Um, so when we talk about like, okay, there's good and there's evil in the world. There's good and there's evil out in the universe. There's like an innumerable amount of variety out there of beings, of consciousness, 4D, 5D, 60, 70, some ethereal, some physical, some more communal or like shared consciousnesses versus some more individuated. Like we're very individuated down here, right? But people are like, okay, if there's good beings out there, it's like, where are they? Why don't they come here? Why don't they land on the White House lawns? Like blah blah blah. It's like they've been communicating with us, and one of the ways I think they've been communicating, excuse me, and it's ironic because this is the way that like is a very Christian view of mine, but like God uses the enemy's tools against him. And one of the things, because I would say like Hollywood is like kind of like full of the enemy, like the writers and the people who are creating the narratives and casting out all the fear mongering. They're the enemy, but God and other beings use them for their glory. And one of the things that I think they do is I think they convey information to us through art that traverses backwards in time. So what I mean by that is like Star Wars as an example. Like we were just talking about the moon. It's like, what do you think the moon is? It's the Death Star, okay? It's information that is being conveyed to us by higher beings, say from God, but it's being sent backwards in time and it's encrypted in the form of art. Art is incorruptible, right? Like it's like encrypted communication, but in the form of art, and it's sent backwards. It's instead of the past sending information forward in half linear time. It's information coming backwards to us. And this is like I would say my favorite movie of all time. It's actually a relatively recent one. Is Arrival. You guys have seen Arrival? Yeah. Aaron, yeah, if you get a chance. I don't know if you're much of a movie guy. I pretty much stopped watching a lot of stuff, but Arrival's really worth it. And it's telling us something extremely important about time. Time is often referred to as like the fourth dimension, right? You guys have heard that before. Yeah. So part of what's going to be required of us to shift into, say, we're 3D right now, to shift into 4 and 5, probably 5 is where we'll land, is to understand time from a different perspective. And what I believe has to happen is that we have to understand that all time is now. You'll hear many, spiritual gurus and many insightful people tell you that from all different walks of life, and it's true. But you really has to become real to you. And part of what it's meant for me is to understand, like, okay, we have a history. Let's just take like the last 100 years, the wars, all the people involved, like all the narratives there. That is actually happening right now. Everything is happening right now. The future is happening right now. The past is happening right now. And now is happening right now. When you have that perspective, you are in the fourth dimension. You're transcending the fourth dimension by understanding. And so on one hand, you can say, well, it's like, oh, that sounds nice, but what do I do with that information? Well, to me, it means I need to go, like, there's clearly some problems, for example, with our history. We need to go right those wrongs. We need to go uncover what happened, because our past is the eyes through which we see the future, right? So where we're going is determined by the way we think of the past now. And so we need to right the wrongs and fix the narrative and understand what happened. Where did these people go? Who were they? And so, Lord of the Rings, the old world, this sort of like kingdom-esque Middle Earth type existence, like, I think that was real. And I think it was wild, comparative, at least from our perspective. In some sense, Lord of the Rings might be more of like a documentary than a drama. But yeah, I really do think like God and those beings who might have our best interests in mind are communicating with us through artwork. And I do think that they're giving us really important information, but you have to sift through it because it's going through the cabal to get to us. So, when you watch a movie, it's like you have to be able to parse it and realize, like, okay, there's some kernels of truth here, but they're casting a very negative view often of like that information.
So, with that in mind, I don't know how to structure this question properly, but what comes to my mind straight away when you describe what you've described? The company that I don't like, that are massive, and it's Disney. And when you talk about art and the creation of the entertainment to be a message they're portraying, what are Disney trying to do?
Right.
In your
Well, so yeah, first off, I think we can acknowledge that there was a time in which Disney was telling stories that were extremely nuanced and extremely important. I remember when I was a kid, my sister and I have two sisters. One was a year younger than me, so the other one's much younger than me. But when Hannah and I were growing up, we probably watched Lion King like 100 times, and like Aladdin like 100 times. Like, and this is something Jordan Peterson talks about. I've kind of become disillusioned with him a little bit now, but I was a point at which I watched probably 500 hours of content. And there's still a lot of things that
the same here, yeah.
yeah, and there's still a lot of things I took a lot from him. I mean, that's what you do. You learn from people, and then hopefully you transcend them. But like one of the things he talked about is just how chock full of information those stories are. And it's interesting because most of the really good ones that Disney told were much, much older. The Brothers Grimm book of fairy tales, which includes things like Hansel and Gretel and I think like Sleeping Beauty, those we don't even know how old those are. Like, they could be really old. I mean, there's oral traditions that trace back 10,000 years. So there was a time when Disney was telling stories that were deeply meaningful and old, and they were art. They truly were art. I mean, anyone with any sense of beauty and artistic sense can look at those old animated films and just be like, they're amazing. And it's like every time a new one comes out, it just feels like a cheap, all the recreations they've done just fall flat. And then like even their animated stuff, it's like chock full of, it's not art anymore. It's propaganda. Now, Disney's been a propagandist even when they were telling genuine stories. I remember when I was a kid, when I was really young, my grandmother had like tape recordings of these old Disney characters where it was like war propaganda. It was like this really dark, like movie kind of thing. So they've always been propagandists, but they were telling stories that were deeply meaningful and nuanced, and carried a lot of information. And they just, it's now it's, like I looked at Frozen. It's probably, I would say, what, like their most popular animated film in the last 10 years. I would have to think Frozen is. I mean, every little girl is like singing Frozen. So it's like I sat there and I thought about it. I'm like, because I've seen it, and I was like, is this art? Like, is this good? And I'm like, it's still propaganda. Like maybe they touched on something. Maybe there's just enough substance there for it to be meaningful for kids, where they're pulling stuff out of it. But like, it's kind of feminist propaganda. Like the main character is a cold person, right? Like when I think about like what a feminist is, it's like they're cold. They're not nurturing and loving. So yeah, I mean, that all goes to, again, I don't even know how deep and dark it gets with Disney. There's a lot of stuff with like this old world structure that gets into the underground, quite literally like the underground. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but like Disneyland is like most of it's underground, right? So I don't know, like how, again, how deep the rabbit hole goes with them. But like, I think, again, they're probably cabal. There's Kabbalistic influence there in Disney. It's evil. But yeah, like, sorry, this is like kind of shifting, but the underworld is, I kept mentioning like the cabal, and there's like another term is called interior government. And interior quite literally means inside. And I do think is structure, and there is a whole world below our feet that we're not even aware of. And that's where like I start getting into more stuff like the toroidal earth, which would basically be like, you know, the poles have sort of like a hole almost in them, like, the vortex, the top or bottom view of a toroid. And I can buttress my argument of that because, I'll say like, yeah, I think there's like a hole, or like, I don't actually think you would perceive it as a hole if you were like on the surface of the planet. And let's say you could go to the North Pole or the South Pole, which you can't, because you can only go there if you're allowed to go there. I think if you went there, I think it would just look flat. I think it would just look like you just keep sailing, and it would just, but I think you'd be traversing into the toroid, let's say, and into another dimension. And in fact, in order to do that, you might have to make that spiritual leap. I don't know. There might be something that's a part of this ascension process that, like, if you were to physically go there, you might have to make that leap. I don't know. But like, Jules Verne wrote, Journey to the Center of the Earth, where like, who writes a story about going through a volcano in Iceland, a real volcano, by the way, Sneffel, like whatever, I don't know, Sneffels, or it's kind of a funny name, but like, it's there, it's real. Like, who writes a story about that? It's so detailed. Like, most of it's kind of boring. It's like, that I think was a real story. And so there's a lot going on below our feet that is primarily not good, I think. And that's why Hell's Down, but like, there's and I apologize because I don't recall their Instagram might be Decaying Midwest or TikTok. I don't use TikTok, but I found these kids, they're like teenagers who have been like exploring abandoned places.
Oh, I've seen these guys. Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah. So I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm from the Midwest. The Midwest is an old, like, just like everywhere, it's full of old world. It's been hidden. Most of it's been destroyed, but there's a lot of it below us. And they actually went in Milwaukee. which is where my dad was raised. So he walked those streets. They went into, they basically, they refer to their places as bandos, abandoned places as bandos. And so like, they're like, the cops covered up our favorite bando, but we can still get in. And it's like, so they're on the street and they pull up this heavy metal panel that's on the ground. It's covering up like a hole. It makes a lot of noise and they go running to make sure like nobody's watching. And then they go down there. They just go down and they go down and there's like office building. There's like office space. There's a gymnasium, like a basketball gym with lights on. They just keep going down. They end up in this like, looks like a bank. It is a bank. It's a vault. It's like old world looking. It's marble with like iron barred area and a massive vault door that swung open. All the lights are on everywhere. There's nobody there. This is under Milwaukee. There's no reason for any of that to be there. And there's no explanation for it either. And it's like, that is a world that we don't realize is there. And it seems to be abandoned, which makes me wonder. It's like, okay, it clearly wasn't abandoned. There were clearly people there at one point. Did they get the heck out of there? Did they go deeper? Did they leave? There's a lot of questions, but like, a lot of people hypothesize that, a lot of these old world structures, even if you go back to like the antediluvian stuff, like the pyramids themselves, there might be more of the actual building underground than what we can see above.
When you take the sand away, it could be more like a pillar structure rather than a.
Yeah, you've seen the imagery.
Yeah.
And so like I have a kid now, so I may think about this differently, but like I was pretty gung-ho about like trying to go with, some people and just like load up, take my AR with me, take some water and like go cave dive, like go like out west or whatever, go find like an old abandoned mine and like just go down there. Because quite frankly, if we're being controlled from below, it needs to be rooted out. It needs to be rooted out like a weed. And, if there's evil stuff going on down there, like if they're spawning kids for mutilation purposes and like all the dark stuff that you'll hear about on 4chan and whatever, like if that's happening, it needs to be rooted out by brave men. So I don't know if in my life if I'll get the opportunity to do that or explore that, but like some of these kids are just happening upon these spaces and it's creepy. It's very
they're
creepy.
Just kids being kids, right? And then they're stumbling on some of these crazy places.
Right. So are these videos still up on YouTube?
They're on Insta. I see them on Instagram loads.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Instagram, like I said, I think Decaying Midwest, and the one kid, I can't remember his name, had the TikTok, and then the TikTok got banned, which is always a signal, right? Like, but then they've recreated other accounts now, and I think I was able to find.
Yeah, I think a lot of the videos
accounts
went viral, and other pages were sharing them, and they're just traveling around now.
Can't stop it now. And it's like, again, I'm from Wisconsin and I've been in Milwaukee. I lived outside of Milwaukee. It's like, there is no history about these places. There is no record of them. There's no reason for them to be there. So yeah, it's all below our feet. And who knows what's going on down there? But I do know that the interior government is probably operating, and probably some of these other beings are operating from there. I know there's there's anecdotes of people who, I can't remember, one guy's name was like Phil Schneider. He's like contractor for the military and like went down into some like cave and like basically ran into a bunch of grays and like was injured in a little shootout kind of a situation. Yeah. I mean, it sounds wild, but like and again, our military, the interior government, the black government. Steve Greer talks about this a lot. There's clearly a branch. It's like a separate branch of humanity now almost. They're way ahead of us. I mean, they might be 100 years ahead of us. They might be 1,000 years ahead of us technologically now because they had some interaction with these beings. They were given technology. If you look into the history of Roswell and what happened after it, Eisenhower met with these beings at White Sands, brokered some kind of a deal, got some tech, and then reportedly, we've already been to the cosmos. We've been out there, but it's not really we anymore. It's like another branch of humanity, but like they're still here and they're still pulling the strings and they're still keeping all of us in the dark. And it's truly crimes against humanity what they've done. But
Do
yeah,
you think
like
some of these people know how to unlock some of the junk DNA that you mentioned before?
possibly, but my intuition tells me that you know, there are things that can only be achieved through spiritual evolution and not technological. And I think that the technology corrupts, you know, and that's why I think, for example, like if the Earth ever, well, I think it probably will happen sometime between now and 2030. Like when we get absolutely smashed by a big solar storm, like a CME, and it takes everything down, it's going to heal a large portion of humanity. It's going to heal us. The lack of technology will actually heal us. Both from a frequential perspective, because like we're not getting blasted by like, you know, again, it's like 5G, vax, all this like seemingly crazy stuff, but it's like we have no clue what it means to be bombarded by 5 gigahertz signals constantly. Like, so I don't know that they have that ability to unlock. Like, I think we're going to get this is like the white pill version of the story, which I think is reality for me, at least, which is uh, we're going to get things that they don't get. And it makes them seethe and they want to, and they can't stop it too. That's the other thing. They cannot stop it, which is why you'll notice that a lot of what is going on in the current world as far as politics is it you can tell, you can sense this stalling that's going on, right? Like we are all ready to just like smash through that barrier and move on to what that future society is going to look like. But like all they can do is like delay and delay and delay and obfuscate and delay, right? It's like they're just dragging it out. And that's what they do is like they kind of keep us in this perpetual state of like misery and fear. And you hear them people talk about like loosh farming, like it's like some being that's basically like feeding off of our negative energy because they've tricked us, right? And so
That's why for the past 12 to 14 years, it's felt like the government and people in power just kicking the can down the road. But it feels like it's never stopping. It feels like there's always something coming around the corner. There's always something. There's always something.
You ever notice how like nuclear technology, like nuclear power is like always like 10 years away? You ever notice that? It's like, oh, we're just like 10 years away from like a major breakthrough. But like we've had nuclear power now for 70 or 80 years. We might be coming up on 100. You know, it's like, it's always going to be that far away, you know? So, and it's not going to be, you know, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to, then in China, they're building that big tokamak reactor. It's like massive. And it's like, oh, we're going to make energy the way the sun does. And it's like, that's not going to be how we solve the energy problem because that's just centralized and they can still meter it and they can still charge you for it. The way we're going to break out of that is by local energy generation. You're going to have some kind of a toroidal device, mark my words, whether it's a year from now or 5 years from now, you're going to have some toroidal thing that sits in your house and generates all the power you need. And it's going to be wireless in a sense. You know, they'll probably make like little, almost think of it like you'll probably get some sort of like USB stick that you'll like plug into existing things that can like interact with it or something. I don't know, maybe not, but you know, that's how we're going to beat that game. It's decentralization of energy production, bring it down to the local level. And that's what's going to happen with Malcom's tech and other people who are working in this area. It's going to be small form factor, low power, implosive nuclear reactions, excuse me, that produce essentially as much energy as you can try to draw from it. And that's going to be when we're free. That's going to be the start of us becoming free.
Yeah, breaking the shackles.
Correct. The other part of what's going to make us free is the money, right? Because the energy and the money, which if you think about it, those two things are linked, and they have been to some extent. So you're familiar with the term the petrodollar, right? The dollar isn't gold backed anymore. It hasn't been. It's sort of like linked to oil. It's energy and money. And that relationship is going to remain, but there's going to be this really interesting connection between cryptocurrency and 0 point energy generation, where basically when you unlock the energy generation, you unlock the money generation. And because if you know anything about like cryptocurrency mining, these things like chew up a bunch of power, and but like, okay, but what happens when the power is trivial? Now the money is trivial. And what happens, like, I want to say this because, again, it's something that people need to understand. People are worried about one world government, the centralized, the digital currencies, the centralized digital currencies that these countries are all going to roll out that will effectively just be one currency. Like that's all true from a given perspective. But there's another perspective, which is once that energy revolution happens, as it happens, money is going to be decentralized for those who choose that path. And what I mean by that is, okay, let's take Bitcoin, for example. All right. I don't know if you guys know this, but the biggest holder of Bitcoin is the US government. So let's say the cabal, for all intents and purposes, because there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. Let's say, for all intents and purposes, the cabal gobbles up 20 million of that. And there's only, let's say it's 20 million and a half. Let's say there's like some small half a percentage point of Bitcoin that people hold. And it wouldn't be that different from now. All those people hold all the money now anyways, but they also generate the money. They print the money. They control it. Okay, well, let's say we've got that little 1% of Bitcoin that is held by the people. What is different about that than regular money? It's infinitely divisible because it's digital, which means I don't give a lick if the US government says a Bitcoin is worth $0. We get to decide how much that little fraction is. We could just say, you know what? We're just going to like move the decimal 10 places, and so we'll make it worth $100 per Bitcoin, which is now actually just a fraction of a Bitcoin. But it's like, who cares? And they can't stop it either. That's the genius of this technology, is that they actually have no way to stop you from holding crypto in a cold storage wallet, right? Like most people right now, they're making a mistake of like holding it in centralized exchanges, which is then they're just going to sell you out to the government. But we are not far away from a point in time at which, all the infrastructure is already there. All those little payment gateways in every retail store, it's one software update away from being able to do transaction in crypto. Okay. So there's going to come a point where I pray, we collectively say we're done playing the Zionist banking money game. We're done playing the Rothschild bloodline money game. We're going to take our ball and go. And we're going to go play our own game. And that is why in the Bible it says, as a part of Revelations and the second coming, it's why the rich will become poor and the poor will become rich. It's because those people who hold all the money now, it will become worthless. It'll be worth dust. All right. And so we're going to play our own game, and that's what's going to free us. So it's the energy generation, so decentralization of energy production, and the decentralization of the money that's going to free us. And it's happening, and it's going to happen very, very soon. I hope a major shift this year happens in those aspects.
Yeah, maybe that's what 2024 is. So what do you think happens in 2030? Your
right. Yeah. So I was for whatever reason, it's so funny because like at a point in time in my life, I did really find it to be kind of silly, the astrology. It's like spirituality for women, kind of is what it gets joked about. But like it's really interesting because I have all like my best thoughts and like revelations in the shower. I like hot showers, and I'll just like stay in there for a long time and just like zone out. And like I had this revelation is like how I named my son came there, and I I had this like series of like I guess like visions basically that was sort of like a narrative or like a story. It was like I was just thinking I basically was like thinking of it in like a almost like a TV series, like a Game of Thrones kind of situation where you had seasons and like a story being told. But I was kind of like because I was like, what will that transition look like? And how could you tell that story in the way that white pills everyone? You know, where it like really lays it out. It's like there's a path for us. And I was like, well, what if you started from like 2030? Let's say like 2030 is like when the ascension happens or the divergence happens, and we're like, most of us are in that good place. Um, could you tell that story in reverse? You know, could you start it there where like basically we're like all superhumans, and then you tell the story backwards where like each season is like a little bit closer to now, and so then you see someone you get to actually visualize and see how we're going to get from here to there, right? Because there's going to be some dark times between now and then potentially. Um, so you know, like I think that the cabal is sort of like a cornered cat. I think they're going to probably lash out. I mean, I like they're fomenting war, like obviously, right? Like it's kind of started with Ukraine, but it's clearly kind of also escalating in Palestine and Israel. And you know, they're going to go for it. And you know, so there could be, you know, and there's also prophecy and you know about like you know period of darkness, maybe like 3 days or I don't know, maybe longer, but like a period of darkness. It's going to be celestial, right? So it's actually going to be a celestial event. Um, and so I think people are going. I think my wife doesn't like to hear this, but like I think we're going to see some scary stuff. Personally, like I think we're going to perceive. Now, I don't think we're going to be harmed by it if you have the correct state, because if you have a high frequency, these things can't touch you. They cannot touch you. You are protected. Um, but I think we may perceive them in a way that we don't now because they're there. They're out there. We just don't see them. You know, and for most of us, seeing is believing. But I think we might see some stuff. And I think in that period, I think my best advice, and at least what I'm going to do is like, I'm building a homestead that's going to be self sufficient. You know, like I'm going to hunker down. Like I'm going to, you know, just going to ride it out. But it may not be that bad. It may not happen that way. But I do think the cabal is going, they're on their last leg. They can feel the noose tightening. And all the timelines that they could have gone for, they've all expired now. They, you know, they again, all they've done is delay, and it's like all those branches, like it's like the Marvel, you know, end game where it's like Doctor Strange is like, how many of them did we survive? Only one. You know, only one timeline did we make it through, but that's the main one. That's the brand, or that's the trunk, excuse me. And so all of those options are now gone for those service to self beings and organizations and entities, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And so I think it's aptly described as an acceleration. You know, what we experience in the next 6 years from now to 2030, more will happen in those 6 years than has happened in all of our lives and probably all of our parents' lives. So it will be an acceleration, but you know, we'll see. We'll see. I have a very white pilled view on it. I think, even though I do acknowledge that it could be not comfortable, in that we end up in a very good place where we are free, and that's really what we want. That's what we because listen, guys, like once we can generate energy locally and we can sort of have like a self sustaining existence, what are most people going to do? They're just going to live peacefully and quietly in their homes with their family and maybe their community. They're not going to branch out and try to go control everyone and, you know, do all this nefarious stuff. And that's actually what it takes. And I know I'm speaking like very authoritatively, but that is what it takes to make the spiritual jump. It's quiet. It's peace and quiet. If you've ever heard the saying, the way out is in, it's in, it's inward, it's implosion, it's 0 point implosion, toroidal. Like, you're a toroid, you have an electromagnetic field, and it's a toroid. And the way out is inwards. It's in the quietness of your heart, and that is when people are free, when they're truly free. They're all gonna. I shouldn't say all, but many of us will move down that path. They will naturally make that progression. They will begin to transcend time. They'll start with researching these things that I did and that you guys are. And they'll go through those series of revelations where, Aaron, you're saying, like, moment you think you know something and then you peel back another layer and it's like you didn't know anything. They'll go through that too. But we need the time, and we need the peace, and so I think that's how I see it going, is like, once we get that energy tack and that decoupling of the centralization of money, I think, like for me in my lifetime here, I plan to raise a family and to teach my kid how to golf and learn more things, and I don't know, maybe try some CE5 and see if I can make some peaceful contact with something out there, or go travel and explore. But like, all of us are just grinding right now, and have been for probably multiple incarnations. So,
I think you definitely have a good outlook on it compared to, because I guess it kind of goes back to what we were saying before about short-term thinking. A lot of people see the problems that are arising and think, this is it. Like, you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, sort of thing. But when you say it in sort of the way you've just explained it, there is inevitably going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, because, well, like you said, the cabal is backed into a corner. So
they're
it's
out
only
of
a matter
time.
of time before.
Yeah, they're out of time.
I think with me recently, since learning about all the stuff what potentially could happen in the future and how dark it could get, I've always kind of had, I don't know, just something inside me, like a bit of faith that it's going to be all right. Like, the best I can do is focus on what I'm doing today and be the best person I can be today. That's all I can do, and the rest of it will work itself out. And that's all I focus on my day to day, really.
Right. And that's the secret, Aaron. It's that is your outlook, and you may not see it as a choice, but it is a choice, because there's like all sorts of black pilled narratives out there for sure. And it's funny because, and people talk about, like, okay, the Earth's a globe, and then some people are like, no, the Earth's flat. And it's like, we get locked into all these like dichotomies where it's like, okay, but what if both are true? And what if it depends on your perspective? Okay. I would love to talk more about that, but I know we've gone a long time. But my point is that what happens will be determined by your outlook and your perspective, and you get to choose. That's the beauty. You get to choose. And people don't realize it. They think the people who think they have no choice, they are choosing. They don't realize it, but they are choosing the negative path.
Yeah. Well, they are taking the black pill, right?
Right. Willingly. Yeah, they're willingly taking that black pill. They're being, don't get me wrong, we are being heavily manipulated down here on the surface. Like, we are under attack, and I don't blame people. However, if they were to, express some humility and go to things like religion, I said, I'm a Christian, like, they might find themselves moving down that right path, that correct path. And, I do. I think those of us that choose that are going to have a really crazy, awesome experience here, in our lifetimes. So.
Yeah. No, thank you for this conversation. It's been wonderful, and we always do say we like to end it on a positive, but I think you've changed the marker on the positive, because you've given us I guess it's like having structure to your life, as in a setting where you've got the light at the end of the tunnel. You need to structure your life around there. Make sure you're white pilled, basically. Make sure you voluntarily take the white pill and stay on the right side of things. Because, yeah, like I said, with the manipulation, it's so easy just to get dragged down and hate absolutely everything. But maybe that's like, yeah, what they want you to do. To
Yeah, like we've been down that path, Cam, where we've seen such a bleak outlook on the future, and it just leaves you in a dark place. Like you think, what's the point? Now, when you come out of it and you look back and you think, why did I feel like that? Like there's so much to be hopeful for.
I feel like I'm in both places simultaneously because, like, I got to be honest, I, I'm angry a lot of the time, when it comes to this stuff. Like, I want to go to war. I'm just being totally honest with you. I want to go to war with this structure and these people. Like what they've done is truly a crime against humanity. And I have, there's that part of me that acknowledges that, like, while I do believe I'll experience like the white pill path, I think simultaneously, it's not like that means the other thing isn't going to happen. It is. And you get to choose where you place your perspective. But I feel like I'm in both places simultaneously in some sense.
I think the best way to go to war with them is by taking the white pill path. By aggressively going to war with them is sort of
Playing their
what
game.
they want. It's the reaction they're looking for.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is. And I don't know. I don't know what difficult choices will be put in front of me, in my life. And, there are things in the Bible, particularly in Revelations, that talk about how, that during that second coming and that period, those who don't disown the name of Christ will be beheaded. Like I don't know, like what kind of tough choices will be put in front of me. I don't know how far they're willing to go and how evil they truly can be. I get a sense of it, but I'm prepared for that too. Like I said, I'm not, by no means do I think it's going to be easy for everyone, or that it's like that we just go from now to 2030 into light and evolution and freedom. Things have to be fought for. They do have to be fought for. But, I agree with you, Aaron. It's like, the way that we do it most effectively right now is by choosing this white pill path. But, they're, if they get boxed in too far, and I think they will lash out, like telling you right now, if someone comes and knocks on my door, like, and again, this is like, if you look at what happened in like Soviet Russia and like the Gulag Archipelago, written by Solzhenitsyn, he says what had to happen is the people who were, when they came to the homes and they started arresting people, that is when you have to fight back. And I hope they never come to my door, but like when they come to your door, you need to fight back, because once they got you in prison, you're never getting out of there. Alexander Solzhenitsyn spent most of his adult life there, and it is a miracle and a godsend that he got out of it and was able to tell his story. But, you need to be ready then and there. And so, mentally prepare yourselves, I guess, for that. But hopefully it'll never happen.
Yeah, it's about building the resilience, right? And if you look at it as we've got a path now to 2030, we've got a golden opportunity, basically. If you want to try and spin the negative chaos that they're chucking on us, we've got a golden opportunity to build resilience. And if we start building now with the small things like the manipulation on TV, building a resilience to that, thinking it's not going to get to me, it's not going to affect me, and I'm not going to give into it, I'm going to learn from it. Then by the time with 2030, and if they do come knocking at your door, you're going to be a totally capable person to obviously handle something so aggressive.
Yeah, and that's like, from a more practical perspective, I guess in some sense, that's why, I am like the furthest thing from a hippie, but like suddenly in the last 2 years, I'm all interested in like, we're going to build a chicken coop. I got some solar panels I'm throwing up on the house here this year. I'm like just trying to build some resiliency, you know?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, literally, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. Like, you know, I want to thank you. I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. If not for anyone else, for yourselves. But I do hope, you know, I wish for all my trying, I haven't been able to garner much following. I use Gab a lot. I'll share, you know, when this podcast comes out, I'll share it there. I'll try. You know, I have an anonymous account on Twitter. I don't like that. I don't prefer to use things anonymously, but they ban my main, so it's the only way. But like, I'll share it out, but I don't expect that I can command too much of an audience. But I'll do what I can. And if you guys need any help in any way, I'm happy to help you. I have a background in web development and I happen to have some time on my hands. So don't hesitate to reach out. Or if you ever just want to talk again, we can talk again.
Yeah, no, 100% we can talk again. I mean, first of all, I think you need to come back on the pod because I've still got about 70 questions I still need to ask you, but we just didn't really have the time without this being like a 6-hour
That's
podcast.
okay. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for letting me. I did kind of what I didn't want to do, which is I did speak a lot, but I'm glad you guys have talked with me a little bit. I think even a little bit more than some of your guests. So that's a win for me.
And then we usually notice when guests come on the second time round, it's a little bit even more casual. And then
because you got all those questions now, like you said. So.
Right. Yeah, I've got a lot built up here, which need your attention.
Well, thank you guys very much. God bless and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much.
Happy New Year.